Hey guys, and welcome back to the High Level Podcast. Thank you again for joining me. If you're new to the podcast, this is the podcast where we keep you up to date on engineering and science, and it's our way of really giving back to younger engineers, to the engineering community, especially in South Africa. All right, so with that out of the way, guys, thank you for joining me again this week. In the news, I have 3 stories for you again, and our first story takes us into tax incentives. Now, this might not sound very engineering, but we'll get to the engineering part of this a bit later. So this first story comes out of, it's an opinion piece. It's by a guy named Sean Nell. He's a director at DG Capital, African Green Alpha. And he basically wrote an opinion piece on, listen, Treasury's doing a whole bunch of incentives. They're good incentives, but it might not be enough for the renewable space now. So the story is called Treasury Dismissing Vital Climate Financing Incentives as EU Carbon Sanctions Come Closer. And it's actually a very interesting article. Again, guys, for all the articles in this, you can hit the link down in the bio. It will take you to all the articles. You can read them yourself. But basically, it starts out with South Africa looking rosy again. I don't know if you guys have felt this. I've felt this. There's been a sense of optimism in South Africa. People seem to look like there's a bit of light at the end of the rainbow. We've hit now, this is going to be on October 7th when this is released, Monday, October the 7th. It has been 196 days since our last day of load shedding on March 26th, 2024. So hopefully that's going to continue on. We're almost at the 200-day mark, which marks a very long time since we've actually lived without load shedding. We got so used to it. It's really great to see that we have constant electricity supply. So there's the one thing. We also have our newly formed government of national unity, which has brought a lot of optimism. It's a lot of optimism in the economy, and we're hoping that these 2 things specifically, but a whole bunch of things in South Africa really coalesce and we start to get some economic growth. People start to have more jobs, we get more skills into the country, and that's sort of what we're betting on here, right? But in order for South Africa to grow, in order for our economy to grow, here's the key part. It's directly related to how much energy we can produce. Because we are such a commodity-heavy country, we like to do a bit of manufacturing, we need more energy in order to grow the economy. So here we come into the problem. The problem comes in that obviously, our energy is built on coal supply. South Africa, no matter which way you cut it, is a country built on electricity produced by coal. And this is where he gets into the meat of this article. And he talks a bit about the EU implementing what they call their Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. It's CBAM. CBAM? I don't know who does it like that. I'm going to call it CBAM, but that's their Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. And this is really, it's sort of a dark cloud hanging over South Africa's future, because this policy is basically going to introduce tariffs on anything coming into Europe where it has a high carbon footprint. So anything that's been, and they're looking at the whole value chain, from where did you get the electricity from, to what type of materials are you using, how are you shipping it. There's a whole bunch of stuff that they're going to use to calculate these tariffs. And this is a real inhibitor for South African exports now. The EU Commission, they did a report, and this is a quote directly from the report. This is what they want to do. They want to put a fair price on the carbon emitted during the production of carbon-intensive goods that are entering the EU, and to encourage cleaner industrial production in non-EU countries. So this is sort of the EU's way, whichever way you want to look at it, maybe virtue signaling, but they really they want greener products coming into their economy, and this is how they see incentivizing other countries where they are buying from to produce things greener, to use greener materials, to just be greener in general. So now, again, this comes back to South Africa. If we're going to grow our economy on coal, this is going to be bad for us. So the EU is planning to implement this on the 1st of January 2026, so not a lot of time for us to prepare for this, and this is when South African goods are going to start receiving these tariffs. These will particularly impact us on a lot of our exports, specifically commodities, things like iron, steel, cement, and we're going to see a lot of tariffs out of that. To give you guys a bit of numbers on this, there was a study done by Westgrow in 2023, and they said that about 43.4 billion rand worth of South African exports will fall within this CBAM tariff policy, whatever you want to call it. So we've got potential for a lot of our exports being not as cost competitive now, with other exports coming from other countries who choose to go a bit greener in their production. So this exposure presents a potential export risk of about 2.13% of South Africa's total global exports and an associated decline of about 0.62% in GDP. Now, for a country that's really struggling to find growth anywhere, these numbers might seem small, but any decrease in our productive capacity is actually very bad for South Africa as a whole. So now, basically, how Sean gets into the rest of his article, he's basically saying that if we're going to do this, if we're going to try and compete on a global scale, if we're going to try continue to export into Europe, we need to change what we're doing. And he sees it as an opportunity for policy to change. So he talks a bit about tax incentives. And this comes back to, if you guys will remember, whoever was around for this, in 2023, we got an amendment to the Income Tax Act, which was called 12B. And this allowed businesses to basically, if you put on a renewable sort of energy form, so like a solar panels, businesses could claim a 125% deduction in their first year of investment in renewable energy projects. So this allowed businesses to say, okay, listen, maybe panels are expensive, but look at the incentive. There is an incentive to grow our renewable energy capacity. And this doesn't only contribute to the business now. Obviously, Eskom was under heavy load. So it's a way of shifting load from Eskom to now businesses privately operating their own electricity generation capacity. And to give you guys a bit of numbers for this, it's increased a lot. Now, this I took from the Stellenbosch University. They released a whole bunch of numbers basically on what's installed solar, what's not, things like that. So in 2022, the amount of privately installed solar, so this excludes municipal now, in 2022, the total capacity in South Africa was about 2.9 gigawatt peak. So at maximum capacity, we could produce about 2.9 gigawatts. This is all private operation. From 2022 to 2023, now in 2023 is when this tax incentive came in, we went up to 5.2 gigawatt peak installed capacity. That's a 79% increase in peak capacity just on solar. Amazing. Now, if we look at where we stand now in quarter 2 of 2024, we've gone from 5.2 to 5.8 gigawatt peak. So not a massive increase. It's about 11% of the previous year. But remember, that's only half the year. We still have 2 more quarters to go. And this 5.8 gigawatt peak is 100% more than what we had in 2022. So clearly, there is a link, however big the link is, between the tax incentive businesses were getting and the actual installed generation capacity, which makes a lot of sense. Businesses will do as they're incentivized to do. So basically, he ends off the article by saying, instead of Treasury and government letting the incentive like this 12BA lapse at the end of February 2025, which is when it's meant to lapse, Treasury should be doing even more. They've seen the results. They've seen people are interested in it. It helps Eskom, helps the country. They should be doing more to attract more renewable investment. And he doesn't really give option for this. He's basically saying more tax incentives. But it makes a lot of sense. If we're going to see a lot of these bans coming out of Europe, there's going to be a few countries as well. Maybe the United States starts doing this. Maybe China starts doing this. Who knows? Who can say what there is? The whole point is people are trying to get greener. Economies are pushing for greener. So South Africa needs itself to be greener. And we can't continue to do that if we're going to build our base load capacity in South Africa of electricity on coal. So there we go, guys. That was story number 1 for you guys. How we can use tax incentives to initiate the private sector into a bit more renewable capacity. Now, guys, we move on to story number 2. And this I've titled Double-Digit Energy Hikes Plan. So if you guys haven't heard in the news, Eskom's put forward some really insane hikes for next year. To give you guys the numbers on this, Eskom wants to increase, as of April 1st next year, for normal customers like you and me, they want to increase electricity tariffs. It's actually ridiculous when you have to say this. 36.15%. They want to increase the per kilowatt price on normal customers like you and me. And then at municipal level, they want to increase 43.55% from July 1st of next year. Now, this is all information taken from, it's an article called Eskom's Proposed Tariff Hikes, Untenable, Reduction Mechanisms Being Weighed. This is credit to Irma Fenter from Engineering News on writing this, but a ridiculous, I can't even understand how you come to a meeting and propose those numbers. I guess it's one of those like propose high and negotiate down times type of things. But even for normal consumers who have already been under pressure now, to see a 36% increase on your electricity bill is going to be ridiculous. So Electricity and Energy Minister Dr. Ramokgopa is confident that government, now he was speaking at a conference, he basically said that government will be able to intervene in Eskom's proposed tariff hike. He was speaking at Windaba 2024 in Cape Town on Thursday, the 3rd of October, and Ramokgopa said that his department had a number in mind that could prove more palatable. He doesn't share the number because he doesn't want to interrupt the process, something to that effect, but he added that, he was really going to try. He said, he had this to say, he said that all he's saying is that 36% is untenable and 20% plus is even untenable. So he's looking at probably a sub 20% hike, which is already better when we've already been anchored at the 36% hike. So again, guys, I think the important thing to state here is that 36% hasn't been approved yet. It's still in process and there is still talks about it. And here's a few excerpts from basically what he was saying. He said that the increases proposed by Eskom would harm South Africa's competitiveness, it would erode disposable income at all social levels, and it would also place the poorest of households in a position where they would have to choose between having a meal or having power. How ridiculous is that? That's a terrifying thing to think about. And basically he said that the things that Eskom is proposing will have huge, huge implications. Now, I can sort of understand both sides of the story here. I mean, Eskom needs to invest more in its infrastructure. They've underinvested all these years, but now the consumer, and actually the lowest of low in South Africa, are paying for their bad planning, for the corruption, for all the things that have gone wrong with Eskom. Now we have to pay 36% in 1 year. Absolutely ridiculous. A little bit more on what Ramokgopa said. He basically said it would be possible to lower Eskom's proposed price hikes through policy interventions, such as delaying, but not scrapping, Eskom's carbon tax compliance, which was set to kick in at 2026. So not a good move for the environment, but maybe a good move for the people on the ground, right? Not having that carbon tax compliance come in immediately, but maybe rolling it out in slower intervals. So he also said that maybe there's a bit of effect that will come from a lot of prepaid meters. I don't know if you guys have been seeing this a lot of prepaid meters being rolled out. He said it would help them to basically be more efficient in their billing, to understand how the grid is working at all times of the day, and it would also help municipalities to claim back electricity, which their municipal debt at Eskom is sitting at about 82 billion rand. That's a very, very big number. So now back to the poorest of the poor, because I mean, most of the middle class, a lot of the upper class will be able to handle it, will make a plan, will maybe not go on trips, whatever the story is to pay for electricity. But the real people who are going to suffer in this are the poorest of the poor. There's no way of getting around it. So he had a little bit to say around this. He basically said that National Treasury had allocated a number of poor households to be supported with municipalities with free electricity. And the number they want to target is about 10 million. And at the moment, it's about 2 million people who get free electricity. Now, there's a bit of logistics on this. Who gets the credit? How do you determine who gets the credit? How do you control who gets the credit? But it's actually wild. This is something I didn't know. About 21 years ago, when the free electricity program started, they had allocated 50 kilowatt hours per household per month. And he said this was surely not enough back then. What is it going to be now? So there's a bit of negotiation that needs to happen at a government level. And he said, basically ending off his talk, he said, I am confident that we can provide some degree of relief. Now, he was specifically talking about the poorest of the poor there. So he's basically betting on prepaid meters being installed will give Eskom better visibility of the grid, how much demand there is, maybe give them better recoveries in terms of billing, things like that. And then he's hoping to negotiate some sort of relief mechanism for the poorest households, which I would be on board with. I think it's unfair that the poorest of the poor now, who are already suffering, have to suffer even more and choose between if they're going to have a meal or if they're going to have electricity. Rather let a bit of the upper class take more of that hit. And how this happens, how it goes about this, how they structure the actual mechanism is a different story altogether. If there's anyone involved in this sort of process, please reach out. Let us know how it works. Let us know how we can get involved. Maybe we can do something together and give a bit more flesh to this idea. But I think it's good. We've got to protect the poorest of the poor. There's no getting around it. And I really, really hope that they can come to something that's not a 36% hike. Okay, guys, then on to story number 3. This is a story out of the plastics industry. For those of you who don't know, microplastics have, in the last few years, they've been getting quite a lot of press, a lot of bad press actually, for having a bit of health effects. Well, they've been trying to link it back to health effects. They've been saying a lot of people are ingesting a lot of these microplastics, bad for the environment, bad for people. So there's been a bit of a drive at some universities to sort of address this type of problem. And apparently we've found a way, specifically with PVC, researchers have found a way to electrically attach plasticizers directly to PVC molecules, which we haven't been able to do in the past. Now, scientists at the Ohio State University, they've developed a way to modify specifically PVC, which is polyvinyl chloride, which is the world's 3rd most used plastic. And the interesting thing about PVC is it's actually not the easiest plastic to recycle, which we'll get back into a bit at the end of the story. But their method, they say, could make PVC more durable and less likely to shed harmful microplastics. And this way, they're hoping to lower the overall amount of microplastics that are being put into the environment, and also for people's health, for people maybe drinking out of plastic bottles, things like that. So just for interest's sake, they estimate that the average person likely ingests between 78,000 and 211,000 of these microplastic particles per year. Seems like a scary number. I don't know if it's bad for you or not yet. To me, from what I've read, the research is still, it's getting there, but it doesn't look very good, I'll tell you that. So currently, just to give you guys an idea of PVC and how it's used, PVC is used a lot, very widespread, but it's very brittle and sensitive to heat. And manufacturers can only really utilizing it after stabilizing its properties with other chemicals during the process when they're molding it. But these additives have shortcomings, they say. They leach out over time, they degrade, and which causes the plastic to degrade, and this is ultimately what releases microplastics. So now, their solution, which is actually very, very cool. The researchers have devised a way to chemically bond plasticizers to PVC molecules in an electrical process, so not a chemical process this time. And this grafting technique, they say, creates a more stable material overall, and it's a lot more resistant to chemical changes and breakdown, which will ultimately reduce the amount of microplastics released into your body and to the environment. So now the associate professor, Christos Sevov, who is leading the study, said that instead of mixing in those chemicals, our method involves chemically bonding the plasticizer compound directly to the PVC by grafting them onto the backbone of the polymer. He goes on to say that this is really one of the few examples that we have where we have a lot of control over the properties that we want to change in PVC itself. He says this is the first step in controllably modifying PVC to give it properties that you're interested in. So let's say you want to make it harder, you want to make it more stretchy, you want to make it softer. This gives you a high degree of control versus conventional methods. And he says this actually increases the reusability of the material many, many more times than how it was before. And this, again, increases the recyclability of PVC, which is, like I said, a bit of a harder plastic to recycle. He basically ends off saying, guys, we're not at scalability yet. This is still at lab scale. And he still says there's still a lot to play around with before we solve the microplastic situation. But now we've laid the groundwork for how to do it. And that's it, guys. That is my optimistic story for you. We might have figured out at least the first steps for how we're going to handle microplastics going off into the future. Okay, guys, so to end off this episode, I've got the obscure quote of the week for you. This is from the man himself, Albert Einstein. He says, be a voice, not an echo. Basically trying to say, guys, have your own thoughts. Don't just go along with what everyone says. Don't go along with, I read an article and this is the way the world is. Do your research. Have a read into things. Don't just believe everything that everyone says. Have your own original thoughts. Be a voice, not an echo. Again, guys, for those of you that listen to the end of this podcast episode, I'm so grateful for you. Thank you so much for being a part of this. If you guys haven't hit subscribe yet, please hit subscribe. It really helps out the channel. If you guys want to reach out to us, you can find us on Instagram and YouTube, wherever you are at the moment. It's at High Level Podcasts. You can find us as well on LinkedIn. You can befriend either, is it befriend? You can connect with either Damon, it's Damon Hunselaar, or Jonathan, myself on LinkedIn. Feel free, hit us up a connection request. We're happy to talk to you guys. We're happy to help you through things, whatever you need. Let us know. If you guys want to send an email directly, it's at highlevelpodcasts@gmail.com. You can drop us an email there if that's your preferred method of communication. Again, guys, thank you so much for listening to the end of this episode, and I will see you in the next one.